Assalamu alaikum. Today we will proceed our discussion about the anatomy of the forearm. Our last topic was about the anterior compartment of the forearm. Today we will move to discuss the content of the lateral facial compartment of the forearm. First, muscles. The lateral facial compartment of the forearm containing two muscles, one called brachioradialis muscle, the other is called extensor carpi radialis longus muscle. This compartment takes its blood supply from radial artery and branches from brachial artery. Nerve supply to the compartment is from radial nerve. Radial nerve is, as you know, it is a branch of posterior cordobrachial plexus, and it pierces the lateral intermuscular septum in the lower part of the arm as it passes forward into the cubital fossa, and then it passes downward in front of the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. And here it lies between the brachialis muscle medially and brachioradialis and extensor carpi radialis on its lateral side. And at the level of the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, the radial nerve will be divided into two terminal branches. One is called superficial branch and the other is called deep branch of the radial nerve. Superficial branch of the radial nerve, it is considered a direct continuation of the nerve after the main stem have given its deeper branch in front of the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. It runs downwards under the cover of the muscle brachioradialis muscle on the lateral side of the radial artery. And in the distal part of the forearm, it leaves the artery, passes backward under the tendon of the brachioradialis muscle, and it moves to reach the posterior surface of the wrist, where it will divide into terminal branches, which supplies the skin over the lateral 2/3 of the posterior surface of the hand and the posterior surface of the lateral 3½ fingers of the hand. The third compartment in the forearm is the posterior facial compartment of the forearm. This compartment contains the following muscles, which are divided into two main groups. First group is the superficial group, which composed of extensor carpi radialis brevis muscle, extensor digitorum muscle, extensor digiti minimi muscle, extensor carpi ulnaris muscle, and anconeus. These muscles, they possess a common origin. If you remember, all these muscles originated from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, which is called common extensor origin. Second group, which is the deep group, composed of supinator muscle, abductor pollicis longus muscle, extensor pollicis brevis muscle, extensor pollicis longus muscle, and extensor indices muscle. Blood supply is coming from posterior and anterior interosseous artery, if you remember, which are branches of ulnar artery in the forearm. All these muscles are supplied by deep branch of radial nerve. Arteries in the posterior facial compartment of the forearm, the anterior and posterior interosseous arteries, which arises from the common interosseous artery, which is a branch of ulnar artery. They pass downward on the anterior and posterior surface of the interosseous membrane, and they supplies the muscle and the bones, and they end by taking part in the anastomosis around the wrist joint. Deep branch of radial nerve, which is the nerve of the posterior compartment of the forearm, arises from the radial nerve in the front of the lateral epicondyle of the humerus and the cubital fossa. It pierces the supinator muscle and winds around the lateral aspect of the neck of the radius within the substance of the muscle, which means the supinator muscle, to reach the posterior compartment of the forearm. The nerve descends in the interval between the superficial and deep groups of muscle of the compartment, and it reaches the posterior surface of the wrist joint. It gives branches to muscles of the posterior compartment of the forearm, which are the extensor carpi radialis brevis and supinator muscle, extensor digitorum, extensor digiti minimi, extensor carpi ulnaris, abductor pollicis longus muscle, extensor pollicis brevis muscle, extensor pollicis longus, and extensor indicis, and also is give branches to the joints and these are the wrist joint and the carpal joints. Extensor retinaculum. This is a thickening of the deep fascia which stretches across the back of the wrist. Its main function holds the long extensor tendon in their positions. Extensor retinaculum. This is a thickening of the deep fascia that stretches across the back of the wrist, and its function to hold the long extender. Its main function, it holds the long extensor tendon in their position, and it converts groove on the posterior surface of the distal end of the radius and ulna into separated tunnels for passage of long extensor tendon. You should know that the term long extensor tendon refers to the tendon of the muscles of the posterior compartment of the forearm, which have their origin in the posterior compartment of the forearm, but their insertion is in the hand, and their tendon are long tendon, and these tendon they are held in their site at the region of the wrist by this extensor retinaculum, and each tunnel is lined by a synovial sheath. And this synovial sheath line these long extensor tendon. It extends above and below the retinaculum on the tendons. The tunnels are separated from one another by a fibrous septa that pass from deep surface of the retinaculum to the bones. The retinaculum is attached medially to the pisiform bone and hook of H.م.d, laterally to the distal end of radius. Its upper and lower border are continuous with the deep fascia of forearm above and the hand below. You can see in this figure, this is the extensor retinaculum. This is the medial attachment to the pisiform bone and hook of H.м.d, and lateral attachment to the posterior border of the radius. You can see distally it is continuous with the deep fascia of the hand, and proximally it is continuous with the deep fascia of the forearm. And you can see the long extensor tendon of the forearm passes deep to the retinaculum, and as they pass, they are lined with this bluish in color synovial membrane. Because the region of the wrist represents an area for the passage of the important tendons of the muscle of the forearm, whether anterior group or posterior group, to the hand, and the main arteries from the forearm as they pass to the hand, and the main nerve supply of the hand also, they are passes from the forearm through the region of the wrist to reach the hand. So this is an important area, and for this it carries an important anatomical view. So structures passes in the region of the wrist, roughly they can be divided into structure passes on the anterior aspect of the wrist, and structure passes on the posterior aspect of the wrist. This is the first. Second things, the structure that passes in front of the wrist or on the anterior aspect of the wrist, they are divided into two groups like that. Structures passes superficial to the flexor retinaculum, and they are arranged from the medial to lateral. These are 6 structures. First, flexor carpi ulnaris tendon. Second, ulnar nerve. Third, ulnar artery. Fourth, palmar cutaneous branch of ulnar nerve. Fifth, palmaris longus tendon. Sixth, palmar cutaneous branch of median nerve. All these 6 structures, they are passes in front of the wrist, and at the same time they are superficial to the flexor retinaculum. Second group of the structure that passes in front of the wrist, they are the structure that passes beneath or deep to the flexor retinaculum, and they are arranged from medial to lateral. First, flexor digitorum superficialis tendon. Second, median nerve. Third, flexor pollicis longus tendon. And fourth, flexor carpi radialis tendon. This figure says a transverse section through the region of the wrist. You can see structure that passes at the region of the wrist. They are divided into structure passes in front of the wrist and structure passes behind the wrist. Regarding the structure that passes in front of the wrist, they are divided into groups by the presence of the flexor retinaculum. As you see, structure that are superficial to the flexor retinaculum and from medial to lateral: first, tendon flexor carpi ulnaris muscle; second, ulnar nerve; third, ulnar artery; fourth, palmar cutaneous branch ulnar nerve; fifth, palmaris longus muscle tendon; sixth, palmar cutaneous branch of the median nerve. Second group, these are structure that passes deep to the flexor retinaculum, and this means this structure passes through the carpal tunnel, as you know. And these structure from medial to lateral: first, tendon of the flexor digitorum superficialis muscle; second, median nerve; third, tendon of flexor pollicis longus muscle; and fifth, the tendon of the flexor carpi radialis muscle. Second group of the structure at the region of the wrist are structure that passes on the posterior aspect of the wrist, and these group also divided into two groups according to their relation to the extensor retinaculum. First group, structure pass superficial to the extensor retinaculum. They are arranged from medial to lateral. First, dorsal cutaneous branch of ulnar nerve; second, basalic vein; third, cephalic vein; and fourth, superficial branch of the radial nerve. Second group, these are structure passes beneath the extensor retinaculum or deep to the extensor retinaculum, and they are arranged from medial to lateral. First, extensor carpi ulnaris tendon; second, extensor digiti minimi tendon; third, extensor digitorum and extensor indicis tendon; fourth, extensor pollicis longus tendon; fifth, extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis tendon; and sixth, abductor pollicis longus and extensor pollicis brevis tendons. Also, we are returned to the same figure. Structure passes behind or posterior to the wrists. They are divided into two groups according to their relation to the extensor retinaculum. First group, structure passes superficial or behind the extensor retinaculum, and these are the posterior cutaneous branches of ulnar nerve, basalic vein, cephalic vein, superficial branch of radial nerve. Should know that these structures, they are arranged from medial to lateral. The second group of the structure that passes deep to the extensor retinaculum, and they are posterior to the region of the wrist joint, and they are arranged from medial to lateral. First, the tendon of the extensor carpi ulnaris; second, tendon of extensor digiti minimi muscle; third, tendons of extensor digitorum and extensor indicis; fourth, tendon of extensor pollicis longus muscle; fifth, tendons of extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis muscles; sixth, tendon of extensor pollicis brevis muscle; and the tendon of abductor pollicis longus muscle. by this, we are reaching to the end of our lecture that covered the whole anatomy of the forearm. Thank you.